Hello,
Hello,
global
global
economic
economic
challengers,
challengers.
to our delegates, distinguished guests, and honorable speakers.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 22nd Economics Policy Brief Meet the Experts.
My name is Haidar.
And my name is Chika, and we will be your master of ceremonies for today's event.
Before moving on, let us read out the rules of the workshop this afternoon.
Participants are expected to remain on the platform during the event and are not allowed to leave or enter the Zoom unless there is a network disruption.
Participants are also expected to maintain a calm and conducive environment during the event.
Participants' microphones are expected to be muted while on the platform, except during the question and answer session.
We highly encourage participants to turn on their cameras during the event while also using the virtual background that the economics team has provided.
Before we proceed, will it be possible for Haidar to know more on what exactly the Policy Brief Meet the Experts is?
No problem, Jika. To give a brief summary, the Policy Brief Meet the Expert is part of the Policy Brief competition, which serves to introduce our audience about the policy brief making, the importance of it, as well as gaining valuable insight from experts in the field themselves. With this event, the 22nd Economics hopes for participants to not only experience an international competition, but also gain new and useful skills and knowledge.
Furthermore, there will be two sessions of today's event. The first one will be a sharing session hosted by Mr. Ibrahim Kholilul Rohman, presenting the topic on digital transformation and its urgency. The event will be continued with a sharing session by Mr. Niall Saville, who will be covering the topic on efficient policy brief makings.
To all of our enthusiastic participants, don't worry, because we will also be having an interactive Q&A session after each speaker's presentations for today's materials.
On behalf of the 22nd Economics team, we'd also like to extend our deepest gratitude to our research partner, Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, for their enthusiasm and support, which has made today's event possible.
Before we jump into the main event, we would like to welcome Ms. Nurhaya Kinasi, Chief Executive Officer of the 22nd Economics, to deliver her opening remarks. To Ms. Nurhaya Kinasi, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, esteemed participants and distinguished experts. Mr. Ibrahim Kholilul Rohman as Senior Research Associate at IFG Progress, and Mr. Niall Saville as Senior Advisor, Economic Prosperity of Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. On behalf of the organizing committee and as the Chief Executive Officer of the 22nd Economics, I am very honored to extend a warm welcome to each of you to this year's event. This year, we are gathered around a theme that resonates across all facets of global economy: the surge of technological power, engine for global economic change. The 22nd Economics is more than just a competition. It is a platform where emerging economists, policy enthusiasts, and future leaders from across the globe come together to exchange ideas, gain insights, and propose solutions to real-world economic issues. At its heart, economics is about fostering a collaborative environment that recognizes the power of diverse perspectives and interdisciplinary approaches in tackling the global challenges that we face today. This year, we are very pleased to have partnered with the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, whose expertise and commitment to policy innovation provide an invaluable resource for all of us. The role of the policy brief cannot be overstated in the realm of economics and public policy. As a tool, it allows for the distillation of complex issues into accessible, actionable recommendations for policymakers and leaders. Through this competition, we hope to not only challenge you academically, but also to nurture your abilities in concise and impactful policy communication. We believe that the skills honed here are vital for the next generation of leaders as they navigate and shape a rapidly evolving economic environment. Economics aims to accommodate and highlight the talents of each participant, recognizing that you bring unique skills, knowledge, and perspectives to the stage. Whether through rigorous analysis, innovative proposals, or strategic vision, This platform is dedicated to providing a space where your ideas can thrive, your skills can be sharpened, and your potential can be fully realized. So I really encourage each of you to approach it with curiosity, an open mind, and the drive to make a meaningful contribution to the discourse on economic policy. The sessions ahead promise to be enlightening, offering not only the opportunity to learn from the experts, but also to engage deeply with peers who share for your passion for economics and policy. So really, once again, I say thank you for being here and for your commitment to this process. We look forward to your participation at our competitions and series of events. Best of luck to all. Espirit.
Thank you, Ms. Haya, for the opening remarks. Now we will begin the session for today's event with introducing our honorable speakers this afternoon.
For the first session, we are delighted to have Mr. Ibrahim Kholilul Rohman, who is a senior research associate at IFG Progress, demonstrating his expertise and dedication in the field of economic research. Moreover, he has also served as a technical expert for the digital strategy roadmap of the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs 2021. He has previously held the position of Head Economic Research at Samudra Indonesia, further showcasing his leadership and analytical skills. Mr. Ibrahim holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Technology Management and Economics from Chalmers University of Technology, in addition to a Master's of Science in Economics from Universitas Indonesia. To Mr. Ibrahim, good afternoon and welcome to the 22nd Economix Meet the Expert Policy Brief.
For the second session, we are delighted to have Mr. Niall Saville as our speaker. Mr. Niall is a senior advisor at the Tony Blair Institute in Indonesia, focusing on supporting communities' sustainable growth and development. He supports teams working with several ministries and other government-linked organizations, particularly focused on inclusive finance and emerging technologies. He started his career in tech and has worked extensively in Europe, Eastern and Southern Africa, the Middle East, and East and Southeast Asia. He also has a degree in mathematics and engineering from the University of Cambridge and an MBA with distinction from INSEAD. To Mr. Niall, good afternoon and welcome to the 22nd Economix Meet the Experts Policy Brief. Let's give our utmost appreciation for today's speaker.
Okay, to start the first session, we would like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Ibrahim Kholilul Rohman. To Mr. Ibrahim, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, MC, for introducing me. Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure for me to be here and to have chance to talk about digital transformation in Indonesia, the wins, fails, and everything in between, and particularly note to economists who I'm sure everybody here, most of you are economists, and you will have such big responsibility to bring forward the advancement of economy in Indonesia, and especially with the driver of digital transformation. So thank you very much for the introduction. I think I just want to add one line, which already mentioned before by MC, that in addition to the position that currently I'm responsible as Chief Economist at the Indonesia Financial Group. Of course, I'm also a lecturer at the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Indonesia. And for many of you, I invite you to join my course, usually during the odd semester, which is now. So if you are not joining yet, I'm welcoming you next year so we can discuss together the topic in a more detailed way. So today, my topic will be revolving around digital transformation and all surrounding challenges, especially for us in developing country, Indonesia. So can we go next, please? Yeah. So basically, in Indonesia, whenever we are talking about digital transformation and technology development, we will be exposed with the data coming from Google Temasek and Bain annual data, which unfortunately I don't bring the latest data available, but the message is always clear that Indonesia is the leading in the region as a country where compound annual growth rate reaching 20%. We have been tested hugely with the COVID pandemic in 2021. Nevertheless, the growth rate is still astounding, 49% of all the value of gross merchandise value generated from e-commerce platform. And knowing that Indonesia's GDP is predominantly driven by consumption, which is probably about 55 to 60% of our gross value added, it is quite interesting that the proportion of e-commerce can only grow in the future. So the market base is huge. The consumption driven has been leading the parade of value added generation. So among traveling, health, food and beverages, then food and beverages are leading the bundle of consumption via e-commerce platform. So this is good news for us that Indonesia is always seen as the magnet of e-commerce transaction and e-commerce development in the region of Southeast Asia. Next slide. However, and it is always however in the story of everything, we have to refer back to the general conceptualization of digital economy. So digital economy is basically the adoption of technology so that all aspects of our life, ranging from production side, consumption side, are all supported by the advancement of technology. So that if we disentangle the development of technology and digitalization, and it is always my first topic when I'm teaching this course in Faculty of Economics, we can disentangle digitalization and digital economy into three layers, three important layers. The first part is production side, which is all the production of hardware, telecommunication services, software, and then the narrow part and the broader scope. So the broader scope is predominantly driven by e-commerce, like we already have discussed before. So knowing that e-commerce has been major driver of digitalization in Indonesia, the question arises, are we good enough in other part of classifications? Are we good enough to be represented by to be represented in the global value chain in other part of digital categories? And the answer is no. So basically, we have been exposed by one part of digitalization, which is increasing value of e-commerce, increasing value of buyings. Yeah, you have been exposed by packet like every time in your home. Yeah, all driven by advancement of technology. But talking from the backward side, talking from backward with the hulu bahasa Indonesia, then we'll be seeing that we are not yet in the respected position in the global value chain of digitalization. Next slide. And this is especially reflected as economists. You can see that Indonesia has been experiencing fluctuation in the position of current account in our balance of payment. So the current account is always fluctuating, but if you look closely, the red part, the services one, has been always in deficit condition. So the green part has been quite fluctuating because majority majority of product we are exporting is currently comprising natural resources, and natural resources will be hugely depending on China demand, and so that it will be depending on what price fluctuations. But the striking contrast is happening in services, where services is always negative. There is no story we have ever reached a positive achievement in services. So next slide, please. So what is in services? So if you look at services, you will be seeing here information in light green. Information has been negative all the time. So this is the other side of the coin, where in one hand, we have been witnessing that e-commerce platform has been flourishing, yeah, in the last couple of decades, especially driven by a massive adoption of technology, massive adoption of cellular, um, massive adoption of social media, and it has been reaching people from variety of background. But then reflecting upon the root cause and the real condition of digitalization, you will be witnessing that information has been always deficit. So for an economist, then you will be thinking why this happens, why we have been exposed to completely different story of one side seemingly successful achievement and the other side is not that, reflecting good news. So next slide, please. So the fact is that majority of product, apologize, the majority of product we are using on day-to-day basis are all imported. They are all imported product, usually related to technology, such as smartphone, laptop, PC, computer, projectors, and in addition to that, services as well are majority imported. So when we are talking now via Zoom, don't forget that internet access in Indonesia is channeled via under the sea cable, and that under the sea cable has been linked to north direction, which is via Singapore and Hong Kong, to be reaching the rest of the world. And this has been going through GRX or GPRS roaming exchange or IPX IP exchange, so that we can talk with your friends, with your family from all over the world. And this has been this has been one of the reasons why we have been experiencing deficit in technology services. So now you have a more complete picture on digitalization. Is not always giving us clear advantage. It is, in one side, it has been helping a lot SMEs, small medium enterprise, grassroots economies, but also zoom out or zoom in, depending on how you see it, then you will see more complex phenomenon that I'm sure with the direction of Pak Niall in the next session, you will be able to draft what will be possible policy brief that is related to multifaceted achievement that we have currently in digital era. Next slide, please. Now, what the challenges we have? There are thousands, hundreds, there are thousands and hundreds benefit, but I'm just jot down some most important, in my opinion, that we have to anticipate. First one, please. The first one is, if you are an economist, you will see that the maturity of the digital market has led to polarization of usage. So if you connect the number of internet users in Indonesia and the value-added generation all the time, you will experience slower and lower magnitude of internet adoption in the country. And this is not an isolated phenomenon for Indonesia. This is very common in developing countries, that the more you have internet access, it will be encompassing many people, and not all of them have the same level of productivity. And when you see the history of technology, especially, for instance, the adoption of M-Pesa in Kenya, that's the first technology of mobile transaction, you will see as well the same. Adoption of M-Pesa has led to polarization of the usage, where some people are less productive and the other people are more productive in utilizing technology. So this is one aspect that, in fact, the coefficient of internet impact on GDP has been smaller and smaller all the time. Second, please. The second aspect is that whenever we are talking about digitalization, it seems to be we're talking everything in vacuum. So talking about Indonesia's digitalization, it is rarely that we think that digitalization has been going through in parallel process. So you are talking about we are becoming more digitalized. Vietnam does the same. Taiwan does the same. Japan does the same. Everyone else does the same. So this is the study I supervise, your senior at Faculty of Economics, University of Indonesia, on the impact of robotic adoption, and the result is very interesting. Next slide, please. So the impact is that the adoption of robot in economy will have adverse impact for Indonesia. So when talking about robotic adoption, we have to perceive that adoption has happened in all countries at the same pace. And if that is the case, then adoption of a robot in the Japanese industry will reduce Indonesia's import, will reduce Indonesia's ability to export our product, so that the demand for labor, especially for the low-skilled labor, will diminish. So can you imagine that digitalization, usually we see internally as if nothing happened in other countries, where in fact everybody does the same, even at the greater pace. Vietnam does digitalization, digital transformation in greater pace, so is Japan, Korea, and other countries. And the fact is that when other countries adopt technology, the impact will hit Indonesia's economy with lower adoption, with lower demand for labor, especially for the lower skill one. Next slide, please. So this is the next extension, more detailed one. For those interested with econometrics, you can see the impact through the coefficient. Friends, this is serious. This is not joking. That when we see more carefully, I think we should be more worried about the future of adoption of technology for countries like Indonesia, because we still have, abundance of labor who are not that in the level of skillful ones. Next slide, please. Next slide. We forgot that the impact of digitalization is always involving cross-border data. And cross-border data for developing countries will entail three different outcomes. Either you push data monetizations and cross-border data flow will flow across country without any hassle, and or privacy and security. The fact is that this is part of our study with Cleofan. Maybe you know Cleofan and Angelic Johannes as I think Econ 2020, maybe if I'm not wrong. We found out that this is too good to be true, that all things are achieved at the same time. So basically, if you choose to push at maximum level of data monetization and cross-border data flow, then the cost will be privacy and security. So that is no wonder at all when you see almost every day in countries like Indonesia, data breach is the story of digitalization. Is it good or bad? Well, one may say that this is the cause of digitalization, but we have to put the target that until a certain period of time, privacy and security should be part of the most important priority under PDP law, for instance, of general data protection right. But as for now, it seems to be that we are more interested to see the other two. So by saying trilemma, we can only achieve 2 out of 3, which means that we have to be more balanced to look into the phenomenon of digitalization. Next slide, please. This is, I think, the most interesting part I'll be talking. Economic policy will never be the same. Will never, ever be the same. So with the level of adoption of technology, then you will see the flourish of digital currency, cryptocurrency, be it, moderated by government under central bank digital currency, or moderated by Satoshi Nakamoto under Bitcoin or other type of cryptocurrency. Is it good or bad? Well, depending on how we see it, it is good as part of, digital adoption, as part of innovation, as part of, risk exercise. But monetary policy will never be the same. when money in circulation is not under the control of central bank, then the ability of central bank to, to moderate inflation, to moderate money supply, to moderate money multiplier will never be the same. So once you graduated from Faculty of Economics and you continue your position as PCPM as in Bank Indonesia, in your period, I'm sure you will see this phenomenon even more so flourishing, which may be yet another challenge on the table that we have to anticipate as an economist. Next slide, please. This is a study we have collected from implementation of CBDC in other countries, like in Thailand. Depending on the type of CBDC, then the impact of traditional monetary policy that we studied during our undergrad, master's, PhD in economics will change completely. That it might be the case that monetary policy will be impacted a lot by the adoption of cryptocurrency, and especially those who are not under the control of central banks. Next slide, please. I think this is the last one. Economists can no longer work in isolation in the digital era. I bring this study by Tantra Tanjaya, who is your senior, I think 2 years ahead of you. This is interesting thing because finally somebody at the Faculty of Economics writing a topic which traditionally under the domain of Faculty of Engineering, which is spectrum regulation. Why? Because economists should be reaching out area where currently not under our study, like spectrum, like crypto, because if you are distancing with those phenomena, it will be very difficult to control as an economist. So you have to start to look into those phenomena to understand, so that whenever you get the position to control, you understand what's going on really in the field of study, which is currently in distance with the domain of economics. So economists should work together with engineer, with sociologists, with anthropologists, with lawyer, as multidimensional problem in the future require the blended of knowledge, and you can't anymore say that I can be Superman, I can be Spider-Man who solved the problem, in the era of digitalization. Next slide, please. So what else? So the future of digitalization is also the importance of synergized policy. And if you look at who does what in other countries with regards to digitalization, you can see that majority of countries are managing digitalization under specific assignment of ministerials or body. Whereas, next slide, please, in Indonesia, it happens that everybody does everything at the same time, overlapping, which means that we have to be able to provide policy brief, under Pak Niall. I'm sure you'll be able to, trying to draw lines that it cannot be like this. It cannot. We will go anywhere with the current situation where everybody does some piece of story, the other piece of story, without any synchronization on what is the overarching goal of our digitalization and what are the tasks that should be distributed among stakeholders. So that's all from me, and I'm back to moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim, for the insightful material. We definitely learned a lot from your presentation, especially on the dilemmas related to digital transformation, the critical issues when it comes to the technological adoption in developing countries, while also comparing it to the labor force in countries within this economic background.
Not only that, but based on Mr. Ibrahim's material, we hope that all participants can recognize how critical it is that technological development leads to drastic change in economic policies. We hope that the knowledge gained during the session will be beneficial for all of us in the future.
Following the ending of the presentation, we will now open for a question and answer session related to the presentation by Mr. Ibrahim. To our participants, please raise your hand and turn on your camera if you would like to ask a question. Once your name is called, please state your name, institution, and your question.
Please don't hesitate to ask questions. Just raise your hands and then the MCs will call out your name. Okay, first for Mr. Abraham Simanjuntak, please.
Thank you for the name from Mr. Ibrahim Rohman. My name is Ibrahim, and I'm from Faculty of Economics and Business, majoring in economics. My question is, what role should government play in extending digital transformation to reduce the digital divide? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ibrahim, for the question. Mr. Ibrahim, you may answer the question.
Yeah, I didn't hear very clearly, but I guess it was talking about digital divide. Did you ask about digital divide? Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Correct.
So in Indonesia, there are many efforts have been implemented to cope with digital divide, ranging from the supply side, which is providing infrastructure provision in a country. But we have to realize that Indonesia is very different to other countries. We have been, well, in the language of politician, in the language of patriotic way of looking at it, we have been uniting by the sea. It's not we are disentangling by the sea, but uniting by the sea. But due to that, infrastructure cost has been very expensive. So if you ever heard about the rollout of the Palapa Ring, which is linking all islands in Indonesia via backhaul cable, connecting islands to island, which means to help providing internet access for unconnected areas, and this is very costly project by the government. But this supply side policy is not sufficient, because digital divide is not always about access. Yeah. It's not always about infrastructure provision, but also about the usage, about the demand side. And the demand side relies more on the digital literacy, digital awareness, on the realizing the importance of internet access, digital access, and this should be the role of all of us together. I mean, the Ministry of Communication and Informatics, which is currently transformed into Ministry of Communication and Digitalization, they are leading actor to ensure digital adoption, reaching out many people, many areas in Indonesia. But all of us, we have different tasks to be agent of change to spread the awareness of the importance of digitalization. Besides that, from the supply side, government CQ, Ministry of Communication has implemented several policies to help more efficient and cheaper regulatory costs. For instance, lower spectrum fee, lower spectrum licensing fee, so that operators can achieve greater capacity, so that they can spread to all over Indonesia cheaply. So those all actions all together are aimed at fostering equitable access of technology to Indonesian citizens. As for now, what are the challenges? The challenge is that if we refer to broadband commission mandate, that internet access price should be about 5% to income. Indonesia is still about 10 to 15%. So there are still a lot of efforts needed to ensure that digital adoption are available at affordable price. I hope it answers your question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim, for your answer. Are there any more questions? Please raise your hand and turn on your camera.
Okay, for Pa Lupi and Aruna, please turn on your camera and go ahead with your question.
I'm sorry, Ka. We have technical difficulties, so is it okay if I just turn off my camera?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so my question is sort of related to the one previous. What do you think, Mr. Ibrahim, what do you think about the role of like international organizations such as IMF and the World Bank in providing help for like developing nations, and are there challenges of international organizations like in providing like assistance? Thank you.
Thank you, Palupi and Aruna, for the question. To Mr. Ibrahim, you may answer the question.
I think we have to realize that Indonesia is no longer at the bottom of pyramid of countries. So we are no longer in the category of, countries requiring assistance from international donors, international organizations like IMF or the World Bank. I mean, we have to go through beyond that. I mean, of course, it is very important to have a partner like IMF and the World Bank to have, advice to us on what to do. But I think it is time for Indonesia to be more active to find out our own problem and our own solution, because we are the one who understand better what's going on in Indonesia. So I think World Bank, and well, in this case, it's more into World Bank than IMF in terms of digital adoption and technology. I think the World Bank has been helped a lot as partner to, to solve, to give some solutions on current problem in Indonesia, such as spectrum auction, for instance, will be appropriate price, which is affordable for private sector, for operators, but also acceptable for the government. As you know, that spectrum is non-renewable resources, which is sold under license, and it should be equitable and comparable to other countries. But then the problem is sometimes we sell it too expensive, which means that operator will get it at more expensive price. It will hinder them to provide services at cheaper price. But on the other hand, telecommunication is also one of sector which contribute a lot for non-tax revenue for government. So this pull and push factor has been quite complex for us to decide at which price we have to sell our resources. And the World Bank came up with some solution and what to do. But again, I think it is time where we should be able to find out ourselves and to be able to provide more robust solution on whatever problem we have. That's my own opinion. Nothing to do with opinion of Faculty of Economics, but I think relying more on donors will not be suitable, as we are no longer countries like Lesotho or Zambia at the lower level of bottom of pyramid in terms of income classifications.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on with the Q&A session. Maybe for Natania Ray, please go ahead with your question.
Okay, hello, sir. I would like to ask, so speaking of small and medium-sized enterprises or SMEs, how do you think SMEs can leverage digital transformation to compete with larger corporations?
Thank you, Natania, for your question. Mr. Ibrahim, you may answer the question.
Yes. I actually have material on this. Not sure if I can share it to you, but the challenge is that whenever we are talking about SME in Indonesia, the challenge is that the definition are not always the same across countries in ASEAN. So we had a study conducted in 2021 with European Commission and the Ministry of Trade. We investigated the impact of digital adoption among SMEs in ASEAN countries. What we found is quite striking, that if we follow three categories of internet digital adoption, maturity, which is the basic one, intermediate one, the advanced one, by which digital adoption at the lower level means easily as the connection to mobile phone. In the medium level would be the ability to operate Microsoft Office like Excel and Word, and the advanced one will be CRM, data, big data and stuff. So Indonesia's SME is falling at the lowest of skill category, and then on the contrary, SMEs like in Vietnam and Singapore are more into the upper category, and the problem is more complex because talking about SME in Vietnam, for instance, they are following different classifications. So SMEs in Vietnam is actually big companies already in Indonesia. You know what I mean? So because the drift into category, so basically SMEs in Indonesia is fighting against big companies in Vietnam under SMEs classification on their national definition. So the complexities are arising because next year we are embracing towards ASEAN digital single market. Sorry, not ASEAN digital market. That's European digital single market. ASEAN Digital Economic Framework Agreement, or DEFA. And that's exactly the challenge of DEFA, because DEFA aim at, creating a platform of digital market in ASEAN by which all SMEs have the access towards ASEAN market. But having said that, Indonesia's SMEs are not at the same level of playing field with other SMEs in other countries. It will be yet another challenges. So if you refer on the data by the World Bank Enterprise Survey, I don't know if you are economics student or majoring in economics or not. So if you are interested, go to World Bank Enterprise Survey and look at the characteristic of Indonesia's SMEs. You will see that adoption of website and adoption of email are the lowest compared to ASEAN. So people may see that, well, that's not a big problem. I will say this is big problem, because that is the reason why usually Indonesia's exporters are very much dependent on Singaporean brokers. Yeah, maybe it's not discussed much in your lecture courses. Yeah, so in some products like rubber, Indonesia's exporters have been very much dependent on Singaporean broker, so that the value added we got is much less than what we have, what could have been our portion. So if you see a Singaporean trade balance, you will see Singapore exporting rubber from where? From Indonesia. I mean, you cannot see rubber from Changi Airport, right? You cannot see rubber in, Singapore Business District. It's coming from Indonesia's SMEs. But due to lower level of adoption, the ability for us to reaching out final customers has been much limited. So that's Nathaniel, the problem we see from digital adoption among SMEs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ibrahim, for the answer. And next, seeing as we still have time, would anyone else would give a question? Feel free to raise your hand.
If there are more questions, you may raise your hand and turn on your camera.
Okay, for Gregory Darren Loando, please go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon. Thank you for for the opportunity given to me. Mr. Ibrahim, I would like to ask about the role of educational institutions on bridging the digital divide and how it will impact the workforce. Do you think there is a correlation between the two, and how it will impact our economic, how to say it, structure? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. To Mr. Ibrahim, you may answer the
Yeah.
question.
So labor quality is very important for the future of the country. Traditionally, you have learned that, from conceptual, I will start from the conceptual understanding that the way a country can rise the level of the economy is basically by moving the long run aggregate supply. This is part of your introduction to microeconomics. Long run aggregate supply, LRAS in Bahasa Indonesia. So that can only be done by higher the increasing level of human capacity and human quality. So more and more, if you refer to theory of development like Schumpeter, Joseph Schumpeter, or the newest one regarding the importance of human quality, more and more, Frederick Scherer, for instance, from Kennedy School of Government. So more and more, the future of economy will be depending on the quality of research and development and innovation. It will be much less on natural resources. It will be much less on your land. It will be much less with your oil, your nickel, your whatever. It will more on your human capacity, R&D, innovation, yeah, and patenting, intellectual property and stuff. So that can only be done by increasing level of education. So a friend of mine, she works for Qualcomm, which is a US-based telecommunication company. She taught me, this is not empirical one, but she taught me that if Indonesia would like to compete with Korea, with Taiwan as a major producer of hardcore technology like semiconductor, robot, or digital product, other digital products, then what we have to do is to provide at least 2,500 PhDs in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So this is a huge challenge for us, where education access is still not equitable across regions. So that in the future, we need somebody like you, we need somebody like Nathaniel, we need somebody like Abraham, we need somebody which has, which have something in mind to leverage this country via innovation, via R&D, so that we are no longer depending on traditional goods, traditional, absolute advantage of mining and oil. And this can only be done by increasing level of capacity, human resources, and stuff. Lastly, in 2020, we conducted a study with lead of your senior, Mas Raka, passed away last year. We conducted a study to measure how many really Indonesia's population entailing ICT skills. And we calculated that only 3 million people are qualified to be called as having ICT skill, which is very, very, very small. So we need to, certainly, the conclusion, we need to enrich our capacity, equitable access of education, more targeted LPDP program. You're not giving LPDP only for economic program at Harvard Kennedy School, for instance, but really to have strong and vision. How many do we need experts in semiconductor in 5 years? So send people to learn about semiconductors, send people to learn about robots, send people to learn about nanotechnology, or all related aspects. So we need more targeted education outcome in Indonesia so that we'll be able to maximize the output of education. So that's from me, Gregory. I hope I answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Ibrahim, for your answer. And with that concludes our Q&A session for the first session.
Thank you, everyone, for your insightful questions and active participation in this Q&A session. We hope the discussion has provided valuable insights and addressed your queries. We will now move on to the next part of our agenda.
To proceed, we would like to extend a token of appreciation to Mr. Ibrahim Kholilul Rohman. Therefore, we would like to respectfully invite Ms. Nur Hayakinasi, Chief Executive Officer of the 22nd Economix, to present the certificate to Mr. Ibrahim, our distinguished speaker.
Thank you very much, Ibra, for your participation and your time. We're very happy to have you as our speaker.
A pleasure and honor. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again, Mr. Ibrahim Kholilul Rohman, for your wonderful insights. Moving on in our event for today, the next session will be a sharing session by Mr. Niall Saville as a representative of the Tony Blair Institute. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Niall Saville. To Mr. Niall, the stage is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in. I know this is going to be a little bit of a long session, so I appreciate your concentration, your awareness, and I'm looking forward to your questions. I want to thank both the hosts and Mr. Ibrahim for what was a really insightful presentation. I will do my best to meet that energy and insight. Of course, I'm talking about a little bit of a different topic, which is more around how to think about policy and in particular creating a policy brief. Can we move on, please? So you've heard a little bit about me already. I think maybe it's useful just to say a few words about TBI, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. We exist to help governments and leaders get things done, and we do that by advising on strategy, policy, and delivery with the power of technology across all three. So what that means is both helping governments understand the choices that face them and how they should prioritize, creating the policy instruments in order to actually achieve that, and then turning that policy into on-the-ground change through mechanisms of delivery. And I think it's really important that when we think about policy, we have in mind that policy is part of the system that government has to have in mind when it's thinking about actually affecting change, right? An updated law on the books it doesn't actually lead to improvements in the lives of the people of the country. And so when we think about policy, we situate policy within that broader approach to governing. We move on, please. And I want to reflect on the words of our executive chairman and founder, Sir Tony Blair. The technology does continue to refine and reimagine how we live our daily lives. Tomorrow will belong to the countries, companies, and entrepreneurs that can work together to harness its power for good. And I think what's important to take away from this is everyone has a stake. And because everyone has a stake, when government is thinking about what to do from policy perspective, it needs to constantly keep in mind what it's trying to achieve with that and what that means in terms of improving the overall lives, livelihoods, and socioeconomic situation of all its people. Let's go on. So let's get into a little bit around policy making. Good policy is about telling a story, and it's about understanding there are a set of key questions that need to be answered in order to situate that policy in terms of what the government's trying to achieve, and ultimately put in place something that can actually be delivered. As I say, before policy, a government will think about its strategy. What is its priority projects? What is its priority achievements that it's looking for? We've seen from the incoming administration in Indonesia, the Insitute. We've seen what was laid out in the inauguration speeches. I think there's a very strong set of direction there. That's something that all good governments do, is set out where their biggest achievements are intended to be, so that both they can orient their own decision-making and policy-making around that, as well as have their citizens know how to hold them to account for the promises that they are making. In terms of what policy itself means, it's really about thinking about, okay, so we have these challenges. What are we going to do about them? How are we going to put in place the instruments that government can actually put in place in order to affect them? And then how do we turn that into action? And you'll see that in the purple chevrons in the middle of the slide, starting with what is the problem we need to solve? What actually are we trying to do here? And okay, so we know there's a problem. What has to change in order to get to a solution? And remember, there can be many solutions for particular problems. Different governments will have and will go about things in different ways according to their local context, but also according to their ideological bents, according to what they believe is appropriate, and sometimes according to what their own political imperatives say they can and should achieve. Having decided what the kind of solution space looks like, we then think about, well, what policy is actually best placed to make this happen, and how does that actually get designed? And then we need to think about, okay, so the actual text of the policy isn't enough. How do we actually make sure that turns into impact? How does that get delivered? And so when you're thinking about writing a policy brief, this is the part of government, the part of the interventions government can make that you're seeking to influence. You need to think about not just exactly what the problem is, how does that flow into the government strategy? Why is it important? But also, what is actually the achievement that's trying to be reached through this problem solving. You need to think about what the possible solution set can look like. What have other countries done, for example? You need to think about who will ultimately benefit from this policy. Is that actually everyone you need? Does it benefit others who you may not be seeking to benefit? And what is the implication of that? Does it miss out parts of the audience? And if so, does that make the solutions that you're looking at not actually the ones that you really need in order to tackle? And then what instruments of government are you actually going to deploy? Government has quite a lot of levers to pull. It can change laws, it can put in place regulations, it can make particular spending decisions, it can tax certain activities. All kinds of different approaches governments can take. It's not just a question of, okay, so we write a law and we ban something, or we write a law and we make someone do something. There's a range of different instruments to be used. And when you're thinking about policy making, you're thinking about what kind of instruments government has at its disposal in order to achieve what you want. When we are writing these kind of policy briefs, we're also thinking about what it's going to cost, because that's very important for all governments to think about, okay, so actually, am I spending this? And that can be direct cost in terms of the government's own budget, can also be indirect cost in terms of what it'll cost other stakeholders in order to align with the policy that you're putting in place. And you need to think about, okay, so we have the solution. Is it actually deliverable? You know, does it rely on data? And if so, is that data available? Can we actually implement it the way that we think we should? Who is responsible and accountable for doing that? We've seen, I think, a very interesting slide from Mr. Ibrahim earlier about the diversity of responsibilities in Indonesia. And that can be a problem when it comes to implementing policy. If you have different stakeholders in government or adjacent to government who are pulling in different directions. So thinking about who is actually able to deliver this, I think, is extremely important. Do they have the governance authorities to do this? Can they actually pull the levers we're telling them to pull? And do they have the resources? If it's spending, will they actually have the budget to achieve that? Thinking also about our stakeholders consulted successfully, both internally in government as well as externally. Will you see opposition as soon as you put this in place? Or is it something there'll be broad support around? Is the policy easily understood? Are you actually distilling it down to tell that story, both to the people who are going to implement this policy, but also the people affected by it? And then how do we know we succeeded? Have we got some kind of plan that will tell us, okay, so by measuring this, we then know if we've been successful or not? Let's go on, please. And just a few quick words about policy to catalyze digital technology adoption. And again, I don't want to step on what was an amazing presentation by Mr. Ibrahim, but I thought it was just useful because there are many, many use cases for pushing digital technology utilization. Just to pick one of the examples we've put around maritime, for example, AI navigation systems, monitoring ships, including with IoT to monitor what's happening inside the ships. Data analytics for port management, and so on and so on and so on. And you need to think about where this kind of digital adoption then hits in order to think about, well, what does it mean from a policy-making perspective? Do they have demographic implications? Are there organizational implications inside government or beyond government? What kind of technology implications are there? Does the government need to make sure that certain technology is available and licensable? The external environments as well. Does the government need to encourage certain decisions being made by sectors in order to drive this forward? Is there regulation that needs to exist in order to allow this to happen? All this is space for policy making to happen. And so all this is useful to think about when you're putting forward your policy brief. Next, please. So let's talk a little bit about a policy brief. What is it? It's basically a vehicle for providing evidence-based policy advice to help the readers make informed decisions. You want them to understand the evidence. You want them to understand your point of view. You want them to understand why what you're recommending is the best way forward. The best policy briefs are clear, concise, standalone documents that focus on a single topic. And this is a refrain I'm going to come back to again and again in the remainder of my time. You need to be clear, you need to be concise, and you need to be focused in order for your policy brief to be well accepted, to be understood, and to be the basis of compelling change. So what kind of topics should my brief cover? It's going to sound obvious, but it's actually less obvious than you might think. A policy brief has to address an issue that can be addressed through actionable policy. That means when you're thinking about the topic of your policy brief, you should always have in mind, can government actually do something to enable this to happen? And we quite often see when people are starting to create policy briefs, they go way, way too broad. So thinking about a policy response to, we don't have enough programmers in the country. You can't simply say, well, the answer is have more programmers. You need to start thinking about, well, what leads to not having enough programmers? Is there interest in becoming a programmer? Is the training and education sustainable, sufficient, suitable for people to go into that line of work? Are there more attractive alternatives that people are choosing instead? So can we identify those specific issues? And then by defining the problem and its contributing factors specifically, we can start thinking about those concrete policy action recommendations that can be feasible and therefore we can put forward. And you have to frame these issues for the reader, so the reader avoids all the work you've just done in order to distill down this big, big problem into the addressable policy recommendations. You want to give the reader enough of a framing, enough of a background, enough of your research, so that they don't have to go through all this work. You've put that on the table for them. Yes, there's a problem in not enough programmers. Our hypothesis is a key driver of that is the quality of training in this country, and we should address that by doing the following. That's what a good policy brief should look like. Next, please. So in terms of the structure of a policy brief, I think it's pretty clear, and you'll see this across any kind of policy brief in different ways. You define the problem you're trying to solve and the outcome you're trying to achieve. You then lay out the policy options, including policies that have worked or not worked in other places, but you lay out what that looks like, and then you give a recommendation for the policy to be taken and the outline of how it will be delivered. And if you think about that, it's playing at the beginning into how it links to the government strategy, and it comes to the end of how it can actually get delivered. And in the middle, you are advocating for change. And that advocacy for change is really the center of what a policy brief is about. Let's go on, please. Now, I'm hoping that this should be very clear to everyone already. I know that this structure was actually shared in some of the materials that you will have seen. I'm going to give quickly my kind of thoughts about each of these parts so that, hopefully you can keep that in mind when you're writing your own policy brief. So we'll rattle through this fairly quickly, if that's okay. To start with the executive summary. Next slide. A very brief synopsis of the main points of your brief, including, importantly, the recommendations. You want this to motivate people who are interested to actually read your whole brief, but also you want to reach people who just don't have time to read the whole thing to get that 3-line summary of what this is all about and what they should do. And that means you might actually want to write this last so that you've got the rest of your content in place and you can distill it down. It can sometimes be useful to write this just a very, very first draft at the beginning so you can see the structure of what you're arguing for. But I think it's always good to come back at the end and just say, does this summary accurately represent what I've said in the rest of the document? Next, please. In the introduction, I really advocate you describe what the problem is, why it's a problem, and why solving it matters. And that can include, again, linking back to what the government is trying to achieve. If you explain what the key questions you're asking in this policy brief actually are, the reader will be well prepared to understand what comes next. Now, you have to adjust this to your audience. Don't waste time telling them what they already know, but give them a clear sense of what the paper is about and help them understand why they should keep reading. Next. Sorry, back, please. Yes, perfect. So the literature review, I would, if I were writing this, put it in 2 parts. Firstly, what the research undertaken was, so the approach you took, and then what was found from the research that will lead to the findings and the recommendations. I think it's useful to present results at this point, but don't interpret them yet, because that is what comes next in the analysis section. But the reader should be ready to hear your analysis and should clearly understand what your analysis is based on. Again, the actual structure of the competition may differ a little bit, but this, when I'm writing a policy brief, is how I think things through. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So just an intermission to talk about research. Do be led by the key questions you set out. Think about the relevance of the research that you're looking at, its quality, the potential biases behind it, very important, and always how it helps you get closer to the recommendations that you're going to put forward. Always look at the context. When's it from? What geography is it from? What coverage of data does it have? So that you're clear about how applicable it is to your research. And where you find gaps in the literature, make sure you note them, because that can actually itself be a good research finding. Let's go on as well, please. So in terms of the analysis, think about presenting the detailed results from your research and do that interpretation very importantly. Thinking how to link your findings to concrete realities and what the potential effects of policy initiatives might be, so that the recommendations aren't a surprise. And the recommendations, next slide. They give your advice to the reader based on your problem statement, research and analysis, what you think should be done and how that should be achieved. Always think about this as a call to action. This is not a document to be put on a shelf. This is a document that should lead to change. And so it needs to also think about who does the action, who's responsible for it, and how to measure success in precise and feasible next steps. Let's finish. Next slide. Results and conclusions, summing up your paper. It's good practice to mirror your introduction using those key questions, but this time using them to underline the strength of your argument. It ensures your key points come across and motivates the reader to respond to the call for action that you made in your recommendation. Next slide, on the references, make sure that you reflect the main primary, secondary sources used. Depending on the readership and in the competition, I'm sure there's rules around this. You need to make sure you follow those. Typically, a policy brief in life isn't an academic paper, so you don't have to source every single claim, but you need to give the reader the sources they need to believe the substance of what you've put forward. Okay, let's go on, please. I'm just wrapping up. Make sure when you're writing your own paper, you do think about tailoring the structure and how much effort you put into each section so that it matches your audience and matches your argument. Understand the audience you're writing for and what they're looking for. Understand your audience can understand you, so don't use jargon they might not understand, and lay out your logic deliberately. Focus on what your audience needs most in order to be convinced. Next slide, please. Ultimately, the policy brief is to drive change, not show off how much you know, show off your literary capabilities, create a wonderful document that someone's going to put on a shelf. So focus, focus, focus. Include what you need to make your case to your audience. Describe that urgency of action, but sell a positive vision for what you're trying to achieve. You, if allowed, can use lists, sidebars, and graphics in order to simplify dense content. It doesn't have to be a wall of text in all cases. And do test and revise your brief with the help of friends, colleagues, and so on, including those who may not understand so much about your area, so they can help you pick up where your arguments are strong and where your arguments may need to be strengthened. That's all from me from this presentation. Thank you so much. I'll hand back to the moderators to go into the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Niall Saville, for your insightful materials. Just like what Mr. Niall Saville mentioned in his presentation, we hope that our participants here can highlight the center of a policy is to drive change.
We hope that the knowledge gained from this session will be beneficial for all of our participants in creating their policy brief essays.
We will now move on to the question and answer session, which will last for 20 minutes. Participants are encouraged to ask questions related to the topic presented by Mr. Niall Saville. Please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question and wait for the MC to call your name. Once your name is called, please state your name and institution and your question. And don't forget to turn on your cameras. For Mr. Gregory Darren, please go ahead with your question. For Mr. Gregory Darren, you can go ahead with your question.
Okay. Sorry for the lag. It is said that host cannot I cannot unmute myself. So sorry for the lag. Hello, Mr. Niall. My name is Gregory Deren Luando, and I'm from the Faculty of Social and Political Science. I want to ask you about the example that you have point out to us. So so regularly when public policymaker makes a policy, they usually only given out like the example that you have brought out, like when there is a problem with less programmers, they only given the solution. The given solution is like have more programmers. I think it's because of the political system and the lack of respect for technocracy, more technocratic approach. How do you think? What do you think that we could do to make a more interesting public policy for so that kind of people can be encouraged enough to drive a more I think I would say professional approach rather than simplistic and general simplistic approach that we have seen before. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gregory, for the question. For Mr. Niall, you can proceed to answer.
Thank you. It's a very good question, and I think it's something that I didn't stress a lot in the discussion, but actually communication of policy is an incredibly important part of policy making. Now, I think that what is communicated is quite often at the high level, but when you look at policy that is actually made, it has to be specific and it has to be pointed in terms of the changes that it drives, right? You cannot make a law that says make more programmers. You can make laws or guidance that says universities must increase the number of participants who are studying STEM-related degrees by X%, for example, or you can assign budget to the number of university spaces. So, what is said and what is done is not necessarily the same thing. And within government itself, that specificity has to exist. Otherwise, basically nothing happens, which you could argue is the case in some positions within various governments around the world. But in general, that kind of specificity finding is done, even if it's not necessarily done in public. Now, when you're thinking about how to communicate that, I think it's actually useful for governments to think about strategic communication. We in TBI have actually done quite a lot around helping various parts of the government of Indonesia and in other countries put forward what they're actually doing in order to reach the policy goals that they've set out. And it is unfortunate that governments can quite often fall into the trap of being secretive or just not understanding the benefits of laying out, okay, so we've got this high level goal, but actually this is what we're going to do about it. And ultimately it's a lot easier to show progress on specific actions that lead to specific results, rather than something high level with a lot of influencing factors that, for the best will in the world, government may not have total control over, right? I mean, governments cannot, at least democratic governments, cannot force people into particular career paths. And so you need to think about that as a government. Well, will I want to be judged on something I don't have complete control over? Or should I actually put forward a specific policy that, I can show I'm achieving? And I think that kind of discourse, we're seeing it more in many, many countries around the world, and the importance of putting forward to the people what a government is actually doing and therefore achieving just becomes more and more important. And just finally, to link back to the policy brief, that is exactly why the policy brief should be focused and should be tangible in terms of what the government's going to do and what it wants to achieve, exactly so that it enables government to do that. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Neil, for your explanation. If anyone has any more questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and turn on your camera.
Okay. For Luvena Abigail, please go ahead with your question.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the opportunities. My name is Saville from Faculty of Economics and Business. So for Mr. Niall, I want to ask, when we try to make a policy brief for developing countries, which area should we think of first if we want to trigger the digital transformation within countries of that economic background? While we consider the complex issues that developing nations are already associated with.
Thank you, Ms. Luvena Abigail, for your question. To Mr. Niall Saville, you may proceed to answer the question.
Thank you. So I've worked in many countries, some desperately poor, others incredibly rich, and pretty much everywhere in between. My sense is, technology moves on. Technology is an amazing force, and we've heard some of the caveats around that as well. I think they're important. But ultimately, technology is moving forward, whether you like it or not. And so the question, I think, for developing countries is not, should we look at technology, but rather, how can we best use technology that both exists and that we can ourselves help create in order to move forward and achieve the goals that we want to achieve. In Indonesia, obviously, there's a strong determination to become a high-income country, to significantly raise overall prosperity within the country. That's something that I think nearly every country would share, both developing and in the global north. And so I think that it's more about, okay, so what are actually the strategic priorities the country is putting forward? Right? Some countries will want to continue to focus on things like food security and ensure that the agricultural sector is well established, is productive, is helping meet the needs of the country. Other countries will be looking at moving people into more service sectors, will be looking for jobs that people in the kind of increasing urbanization of their country can actually do, which are not going to be land-based, which are going to be, working with people, working with technology, whatever it may be. Whatever that is, I think there's always a role for that technology. I've done a lot of work in Africa, including in farming communities that are basically subsistence or just above subsistence, around things like ag tech, around helping them use technology to improve their yields, to improve their approach to farming, improve their participation in marketplaces, and in some cases introduce them to marketplaces for the first time. So, no matter where you are, I think technology is always something that can be used in order to make lives better, as well as, in some cases, to threaten what's already been achieved. And we've talked a little bit about the issues of employment with things like robotics and so on. It's very important to have that in mind as well. But I would never say it's an either or. And I think, within TBI and in my past experience as well, there's always a positive role for technology if you go out and look for it. And, many countries have actually leapfrogged in many ways. The cost, for example, of installing copper telephone lines to every household is huge. A lot of countries don't have that, and they don't need it because they switched almost directly to cellular technology, to mobile broadband, increasingly to satellite technology as well. And so, why replicate the costs of yesterday if you can use technology to create an economy of tomorrow? So that's all I'd say. Think about trade-offs, absolutely. But those trade-offs don't tend to be technology or no technology. They tend to be, how do we use technology to best achieve the goals that we as a country have? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Niall, for your explanation. For anyone else who would like to give a question, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay, for Ms. Rana Dia Ainaya Putri, please go ahead with your question.
Okay, hello, Mr. Niall, am I audible?
Sorry, before that, can you please turn on your camera?
Okay, first I would like to apologize. I could not turn on my camera, so is it okay if I only open my microphone?
Okay, that's okay.
Okay, so I would like to ask a question. So in the process of analyzing key problems and possible solutions, it is possible for the root problems to be interrelated or maybe intertwined with other issues that might be out of scope from our initial topic. Recalling your advice in having a specific and concise topic on solutions, how can we construct our solutions and questions to be concise and accurately tapered to our specific issue that we want to handle, considering its complex nature with other problems of the country at hand? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ranadia, for your question. To Mr. Neil, you may proceed to answer the question.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that question. I think it cuts to the heart of a lot of actually what is a key difficulty of writing a good policy brief, because many of the issues within this space are interrelated. Many of the issues that government face are interrelated, and different governments have different ways of approaching that. Some have task forces, some have coordinating ministries, some have everything kind of determined from the top or the cabinet level. And so it's incredibly important when you're working through your policy brief to be clear about that. I think what I would suggest is actually, if you think about the post-it note slide that I had and how we break down the problem that I put forward of not enough programmers, you can see that there are many, many contributing factors to that. Some will be more important than others. Some will have a greater impact on that particular problem than others. Of course, it may take 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 50 different policy changes in order to comprehensively tackle a particular issue. But I think when you start to drill down to it, you will see there are clear priorities that are either needed in order to accelerate or getting in the way as a barrier to achieving the policy outcome you're trying to achieve that you should be looking to tackle first. It may not solve the whole problem. In fact, it probably will not. But it'll be either getting a barrier out the way that otherwise would mean you're not able to achieve any real progress to that policy goal, or it may get you 50, 70, 90% of the way there, but that's still a significant improvement compared to not implementing it. So a lot of it is about moving from that kind of high-level problem through to what those particular specific issues and their related policy recommendations look like. And I would encourage you to then, when you're dividing up the various contributing factors, don't think of them all equally. Think about what each one is really contributing to the issue that you're tackling and what solving that particular one would contribute to you getting to the goal that you're trying to get to. And governments have to do this all the time. There's not infinite time or infinite money for any government, much as they might hope or desire that. They have to prioritize, and the way they prioritize is by asking those key questions. What is getting in the way? What is blocking us? And what is the most important contribution to us not reaching the outcomes we want to reach? And how can we specifically solve that? Even then, you may come up and you say the only way to solve this very specific issue is with 2 different changes or 3 different changes. And maybe that's something that your policy brief does then have to reflect. That we need this ministry to do X and that ministry to do Y, and that should be coordinated in order to solve this particular issue. And that's okay as well. Policy briefs quite often have that kind of need for government to coordinate action across a couple of different spaces. But what it can't be is something so broad that everyone is just scratching their head and saying, well, we don't know what we should do first, and we don't even know, how to measure whether we've achieved it or not. That's what a policy brief needs to avoid. And honestly, there are a lot of policy briefs out there that do fall into that trap. So it's important you make sure that you do not, that it's very clear who will do what, how it will contribute to solving the problem, and how you're able to measure, or the person that comes after you will measure, we've actually achieved what we set out to achieve. And I think if you keep that in mind, you will have a very focused and very strong policy brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neil, for your wonderful insight. If there are any more questions, please feel free to turn on your camera and raise your hand.
For anyone wanting to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand and turn on your camera. Thank you. Okay, for Mr. Rafi Aurelian, please go ahead with your question.
First of all, thank you so much for such insightful presentation, and I'm grateful for that, especially for me personally. For questions, this is more technical questions. However, since this is also related to the policy brief competitions that we are going to compete with each other, and I would like to ask, what are things we should avoid putting into our policy brief, since it is also related to the substance and to the and content, and also what are like your recommendations towards these questions, especially so we could go propose on better solutions, especially in the making of this policy. And I think this is yeah, related to it. And however, for more, I'm very sorry for not turn on my camera, because this I'm outside of my house and such an inconvenient condition. So yeah, this is my questions, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Rafi, for your question. Mr. Neil, you may proceed to answer the question.
Thank you. If I got the questions correctly, I mean, on the second one, I think that this is really a case of what your research leads you towards, right? I mean, the recommendations should be based on the work that you've done in terms of creating the evidence base for the recommendation you're going to put forward. And that will involve looking at, what people are saying, what people have done in other contexts, thinking about how that context is applicable to the location and the policy space that you're analyzing. I would again recommend that you very clearly defined at the start of your policy brief the problem that you're trying to solve or the issue that you're trying to work on, that it's narrow and focused enough so that there's a clear link from that to your evidence base, from your evidence base to your analysis, and from your analysis to your recommendation. When you're reading your paper, nothing in the next section should really be a surprise to the reader. They should be able to see very clearly the kind of logical flow from each stage to the next. And I think, a key of a good policy brief is that everything in it feels like almost it's inevitable. Like when the reader gets to the end of it, they're thinking, oh, well, that's so obvious. I can see exactly why. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't have two policy briefs arguing exact opposite positions. It's about the way that you're putting forward your arguments. That also doesn't mean hiding the weaknesses of your arguments. It means arguing with the evidence that you have in a compelling way as to why what you're putting forward is actually the right way to go about this. In terms of the first question, what not to do, I think, again, don't include anything that's not necessary for the core of your argument and your progression from that problem and issue statement through to your recommendation. If it's superfluous, it's probably not actually helpful for the case that you're making. If it's a tangent, maybe that's something that a different policy brief should contain and not yours. But be very, very focused. Use language that your audience will understand. It's also very easy to get dragged into using jargon, but if it's incomprehensible to the readership that you want to read it, then they're just not going to engage. So make sure that you're using simple terms, explained clearly as best you can. In some cases, jargon's impossible to avoid, in which case explain it well, make sure that it's clear to the reader what you mean by it and how you're using it, so that when they're reading your paper, they're not getting caught every 2 lines by saying, actually, I don't really understand what this means. Maybe I have to go back and reread the previous paragraph. But rather, it's easy for them as they're making their way through. And, make drafts of this, do engage with other people, have them read it, have them feed back to you. Don't work on this entirely in an echo chamber. Make sure that you've got good feedback from people you trust in terms of, am I achieving what I want to achieve from this policy brief? And I think, have fun, right? Pick things that you're passionate about, pick things that you are excited by, because that will also come through in your paper. And again, have that positive vision of what happening will actually They just talk about the negative, the people positive about
And with that, ends the mark of our Q&A session. To recap what Mr. Niall stated, a good policy is tackling all the root causes of an issue and creating solutions to problems that have been derived. A good policy brief encapsulates the use of government instruments, enough framing and research, definition of the problem with a clear solution, and different strategies that have been previously used. Thank you, everyone, for your insightful question and active participation in this Q&A session. We hope the discussion has provided valuable insights and addressed your queries. If you have any further questions, please feel free to connect with our speakers after the session. We will now move on to the next part of our agenda.
At this time, we would like to extend a token of appreciation to Mr. Niall Saville. We therefore respectfully invite Ms. Nurhaya Kinasi, Chief Executive Officer of the 22nd Economix, to present the certificate to Mr. Saville.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Niall. It's been a privilege for us to gain so much insight and knowledge from you. So I'm looking forward to further collaboration with the Tony Blair Institute. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's been a real pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saville, for your insightful contributions today.
We would also like to call upon the documentation team to lead this photo session for this afternoon's event.
All right, good afternoon all. I'm James and I will be leading the documentation sections. So there is a few slides of it and I'm gonna take it one by one. And for the first slide, please put your best mouse in 3, 2, 1. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. And last slide. Okay, thank you very much.
Before we conclude today's event, we will now have a special session and would like to invite the public relations team of the 22nd Economix to take over briefly. To the public relations team, the stage is yours.
Hello, Economics Challengers! Welcome to the 22nd Road to Economics. My name is Aleph, and I'm here with my partner,
Hola, and we are from
Public Relations Division. Today, we would like to give you a brief overview of the 22nd Economics. But before that, I heard that there will be some special offer in the end. Is that right, Ola?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So please stay with us until the end, as we will be providing a referral code that offers 10% off from our registration fee.
Wow, 10% discount. That is such an interesting offer, Ola. Okay, so without further ado, let Ola explain in detail about the brief overview of the 22nd Economics.
The 22nd Economics is an international series of economic events held under canopy FEBUI. Our events aspires to be the medium for students from diverse backgrounds and disciplines to present, discuss, and potentially find solutions for the current global economic issues through international seminar, paper competition, essay competition, policy brief, and model United Nations. Moreover, Economics embraces these various world cultures and hosts additional casual events to facilitate and enrich cultural exchange.
The 22nd Economics will begin with a networking delegates and networking sessions on February 10, 2025, followed by the international seminar on February 11, 2025, then continued on February 12th, the first day of the paper competition, MUN workshop, and company visit. On February 13, we'll feature the second day of paper competition, the first day of MUN, and the economic social night. The event will conclude on February 14 with the policy brief competition, the second day of MUN, and cultural gala. For this year's economics, the grand theme would be the search of technological power engine for global economic change. The fourth industrial revolution has expedited the pace of technologies and shifted the frontier between humans and machines. These advancements also evoke mounting concerns about their potential effects on the workforce, particularly amidst heightened inequality and polarization with the labor market. Beyond that, technological advancements including artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, additive manufacturing, and blockchain has also been instrumental in reshaping the dynamic of global trade and commerce. But as technological advancements continue to reshape industries and economies, the persistence of disparities becomes evident. The 22nd Economics also provide 3 sub-themes, which are the impacts of technological development on the labor market, bridging the digital divide across nations, and revolutioning global commerce through digital technology.
Having familiarized ourselves with this year's economics grand theme and sub-themes, we are now pleased to introduce our first program, which is Model United Nation. Each registrant is allowed to choose one council and one topic according to their preferences from the available selections, which are International Labor Organization, United Nations Council of Trade and Development, and Disarmament and International Security Committee.
Advancing to the next program, economics also includes a seminar series, one of which, the International Dialogue, which has been successfully conducted in the past, and this seminar has proven successfully in educating international audience regarding niche issues that have an effect on the global economy. In the coming days, the next program, the International Seminar, will be held under the theme Reimagining the Global Economic Landscape Amidst Technological Transformation, and will encompass 3 sub-themes, which are reshaping the labor market in the wake of automation, promoting digital inclusion for nationwide development, and bridging technological collaboration to improve global trade.
Lastly, we are excited to introduce the third program, which is competition. This competition includes paper competition, essay competition, and policy brief competition. The paper competition is one of a series of economics events where participants are tested on their ability to research and write papers in accordance with the themes and sub-themes listed in this year's event. The series of paper competition events consists of call for proposal, paper submission, meet the experts, knowledge assessment, and conference. The next competition is essay competition. This competition is open to domestic and foreign participants. Essay competition will be charged a registration fee of 75,000 rupiah for the normal price, and there is no fee for overseas participants. The last competition is policy brief competition. This competition is held for all students on an international scale with the aim of proposing policies or policies that are in accordance with the issues given. This competition was held offline where the top 6 finalists will visit the venue on the D-Day of the competition. The official competition partner for this year's economics are the World Bank, LPM FEBUI, and Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. In the previous economics, we were privileged to be joined by participants from all around the world.
To conclude today's presentation, we are providing the registration link and QR code, which will direct you to the economics website. You can also get 10% discount by using the referral code.
What is the referral code, Aleph?
The referral code is Economics MTE. I repeat, Economics MTE.
In conclusion, we would like to extend our sincere thanks for your time and attention today. We hope that the presentation provided valuable insights and was beneficial for all. I'm Ola.
I'm Aleph, and we appreciate your participation.
The 22nd Economics
Spirit.
Thank you to the public relations team for the announcement. Don't forget to register for the 22nd Economics competition, everyone. We hope to see your names on our registration list.
With that, we officially conclude our event. Once again, we would like to thank our research partner, Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, that has made Meet the Experts Policy Brief session possible.
To students from the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Indonesia, please do fill in the form that we have provided in the Zoom to confirm your attendance on our event. Furthermore, don't forget to register for our competitions at www.economicsfebui.com and follow us on our social media at economicsfebui to see more from us.
We look forward to all of your participation. Until then, I'm Chika.
And I'm Haidar. Thank you for attending our first Meet the Experts session. Espirit!